Hello, educators. Welcome back to the UbD Like a Boss series. This episode, we're going to jump into stage one, the desired results, and the focus is going to be on all things standards related. So I will dive into the what, the why, and the how of standards. All right, remember to like, share, subscribe. We are trying to influence one teacher in one classroom somewhere on the planet. And hit that notification bell so you are aware when a new video is dropped. Treat this as any other professional development. Go at your own pace. Go to the sections of interest to you and grab a unit and practice. The more we practice the UbD framework, the better we become at it. All right, let's dive right in and get our learning on. All right, welcome back to the UbD Like a Boss series. We're in stage one, and this episode is going to focus on all things standards related, the standards. So, stage one is addressing the questions, where are we going and what should we be able to know or do? That is, what should the students be able to know and do? These are all the elements of stage one. This video is going to focus on the standards. I like to look at the what, the why, and the how. So that's what I'm going to dive into. Other episodes will look at other parts of stage. All right, so let's look at, if you're designing a unit plan, then stage one would look something like this. Below, because it couldn't fit on my screen, you would see the learning targets popping up underneath that acquisition. So for, I don't know if the word is ease or just for easy flow of thoughts and idea, for me, a table is a good tool for me to use to lay out the unit plan, or the stage one of the unit plan. So these are all the elements that you would see in stage one. So what are standards? What are standards? Standards can be looked at as the broad learning goals that determine what students should know and be able to do. All standards are not made equal. In some curriculum documents, the standards are very broad and not very, can be ambiguous. In the standards, you will find the specific skills and knowledge that students are to know. The standards should provide a clear expectation of learning for the students, and oftentimes the standards will require some amount of unpacking. So where do we find our standards? They are usually found in curriculum documents. In some curriculum like the NGSS, the standards are very broad, ambiguous statements. I find some of them ambiguous. While in other curriculum like IGCSE or IB, these are curricula I've worked with, they are more goal statements or aims as opposed to a broader goal statement. Well, I've not seen the broader goal statement. So they would on the surface seem as if they don't need as much unpacking. That's debatable. But your standards are usually found in your curriculum document. Now, why? Why should standards be unpacked? most standards usually will require some amount of unpacking. And when I say unpacking, I'm thinking of really pulling it apart, tearing it apart, dissecting it, looking at all the elements of that standard collaboratively, right? Because the more collaborative the process, the clearer the outcomes and the goals for the students at a particular grade level. So on the screen, it mentioned some reasons why standards should be unpacked. Especially if the standards are broad and ambiguous, then the team should look at the standards and determine what is the standard asking the students to do. What are the action, the verbs in the standard? What are the nouns in the standards? What are the concepts, the big concepts in the standards, right? And then breaking down the criteria for success in that standard, right? So it allows you to uncover the content, to pull out what the students, the codes, what students should know and understand and be able to do. It is from that you need to pull out the big ideas, the enduring understanding and the essential questions. It is from the standard that you're also going to determine the level of rigor. Some standards can be used across multiple grade level, but you at a particular team will have to determine how far should we go, what is the boundary for this grade level, right? To what's the difficulty level for this grade level. For example, in science or in biology, a main concept or standard looks at structure and function relationship, right? And this has applicability from elementary all the way up to grade 12, right? But the level of rigor and the depth that we go into is not going to be the same. So again, at the collaborative process, determining the level of rigor, unpacking will allow us to determine that. And unpacking will allow us to set clear and measurable goals that will inform instruction. So those are some reasons for unpacking. I was reading this article on ASCD, and something that really jumped out at me that I kind of briefly want to share is that here it says, in fact, a standard represents key principles that demand constant thought and discussion. And that's the part that jumps out at me. It demands constant thought and discussion. As I think about standards that I've unpacked before in the unit that I'm working on now, and I realize that, I'm constantly going back just to see, okay, are all these elements pulled out? Do I have the enduring understanding? Are the essential questions aligned to the enduring understanding? Or did I pull out the correct concept for our students? Are the learning targets aligned back to these concepts? So it requires that constant thought and discussion with your team. And then when the team sits down to discuss it, you're now realizing that, okay, maybe we need to look at this again. How does this fit with this part? So that is what unpacking means, right? And another thing I want to just quickly talk about here, in many documents or some curriculum documents, right, the standards or the aims or the objectives are written in this hierarchical form. And a lot of times, and I have done it before, where this hierarchy of objectives that we think that this is how we should be teaching every single objective in this document. And according to the article here, this is not wise. This practice is an unwise pedagogy. I do not like that word. And that was not the curriculum writer's intent. And if that was the writer's intent, then curriculum designers out there, we maybe need to rethink that intent. It's not possible. So when we have these curriculum documents that would on the surface seem to be unpacked, I would say perhaps there still needs to be more unpacking or repacking, okay? See where all these pieces fit into a bigger context. What's the bigger context? What's the big idea that it fits with? Can I pull these pieces back together to create a story and something that creates connection for the students, where you as a teacher will not necessarily have to teach every single objective, because it's not possible. It is not possible. So I like this quote here. A good meal is more than just the listed ingredients in the recipe. So how do we bring all those ingredients together, all those individual objectives together, right, to create the good meal? So that's something to think about, and that's a part of unpacking. So here I mentioned that, when you have your standards, you may have these different scenarios, not unpacked at all, like the NGSS document, or it's unpacked and the learning target is given. And in that case, I would say the team still need to look at those learning targets and ask yourself the bigger question: where do these learning targets align? What is the bigger context that they fit in, right? So look at those enduring understanding, look at those essential questions, right? Look for the connections to see, okay, what's the bigger picture of these learning targets for the journey for the students. And then also look at those learning targets and determine criteria for success. What will that look like for each learning target? What are the expectations for the students, right? And define that. So that what are the jargons and the language for the students, right? What's the difficulty level of these learning targets, right? What's the boundary for these learning targets, so that all teachers are saying the same things. It shouldn't be when we come to the assessments that we're like, the students are like, what is this? And even the teachers be like, oh, we were supposed to go to that depth. We were supposed to have this level on the Bloom's taxonomy. We were supposed to use this kind of language. It should not be, right? If that's the case, we mess up somewhere along the journey. All right. And then that hierarchy of objectives, that the intent was never for us to teach that way. There should be some unpacking of those objectives, or perhaps repacking if that's a situation. Anywho, so I wanted now to jump into the how, right? Some steps. Why my document keep jumping all the way like a crazy person? Some steps in unpacking a standard. All right, so I'm going to walk us through the steps. I like to use steps. I like to visualize using these, concrete steps. That works for me. So some steps in how to unpack standards. And I'm talking about, in this case, standards that are not that are unpacked. This makes no sense to me. Okay, those broad statements, okay? Those broad statements that really requires us to break them apart. So the first step is identify your standard. Select where that standard is from your curriculum document and write it down as is, right? Or paste it somewhere as is. That's the first step. I'm going to walk us through the step, and then I'm going to show an example of what that looks like in my science course that I teach, right? Then the second step is to break down that standard into its key components. So here we're saying like, pull out the concepts, the what students need to know and understand, right? And then pull out the skills, the how, what students should be able to do, and an action you can do to here is to highlight and circle. So a colleague of mine, she had this huge sheet of A3 paper, and she was literally doing it on the paper. She printed out some stuff on the paper, and for her it makes sense writing it down. However it works for you, for me, I do it on my computer and I may color code, so I may highlight the concepts and then circle the skills, the how, right? So that's the second step. And then stage 3 now, oh, my image is not showing, I will have to put this image in, right, is determine the depth of knowledge. Analyze the verbs to determine the level of cognitive demand, right? How deep should we go, right? And here I discovered, and for many of us who probably are familiar with this, the depth of knowledge framework. And I will put an image here. My image is not showing, but determine the depth of knowledge for your for the verbs, for the how, the skills, right? So is it going to be recall? Yeah. Or is it going to be skills / concepts, which is the second level? Or is it going to be strategic thinking? Or is it going to be extended thinking? So there are 4 levels of DOKs, or depth of knowledge. The lowest level is the recall, what students should know, remember, right? Then the skills and the concept level, then the strategic thinking level, and then the extended thinking level. So we have to determine that. And then step 4 is going to be to determine the enduring understandings and the essential questions, right? So now we have to, yeah, that's my step 4, right? So we have to convert this standard now. We have to look at it and we have to pull out what are the big ideas that I want my students to walk away with? What are the driving inquiry questions? It's from those standards that you're going to now frame your big ideas, your enduring understandings, and that you're going to develop the essential questions that is going to drive inquiry and really be that engine of curiosity right throughout the unit. And then step 5 is now, having done those things, translate your standards now into your learning targets. So we're breaking it down. We know the what, we know the how. So we're going to take those now and we're going to create specific, clear, measurable learning targets that are written in student friendly language. And one way that is done is I can, right? I can do this. So the learning targets are going to be written as what students should know, what students should understand, and what students should be able to do. All right, let's look at an example that a standard that I've worked with before. So here is a standard, which is step 1, identifying our standard, right? So the standard here says students should be able to use arguments supported by evidence for how the body is a system of interacting subsystem composed of groups of cells. This is a very broad standard. Like it needs some breaking apart, right? So for sure, I could not just get up and just say, oh, I'm going to teach this standard. What am I teaching exactly from this standard? So the next step tells me to break the standard down into the what and the how, right? So the what are my concepts. So from this, and of course, I would highlight my concepts, right? So from this, my concepts are argument, right? Which suggests that the students will need to construct a reason, case or explanation, evidence, right, to refer to the data or the information that students will use to support their argument. Body, the overall system being discussed. System refers to the body as a whole functioning unit. Subsystems, the various parts of the systems within the body that interact, and groups of cells indicate the cellular level that makes up the subsystem. So those would be my concepts. Then I would circle my skills. And so my skills here could be use, which implies the action of employing something, in this case, the evidence to construct an argument. Supported by indicates the requirement to back up their argument with evidence. So here would be a great opportunity for claim evidence reasoning in science, right? And then another skill would be interact. So students will need to understand and explain the relationship between subsystems. All right. All right, so now step 3 here, in step 3, where students here, now we have to determine the DOK, the depth of knowledge, right? To what depth do we want the is this learning going to dive into? So let's analyze the depth of knowledge, right? And that would be related to the skills, the use, the supported by, the interact, right? So here, the recall or understanding, DOK1. So for me here, that would be students will have to recall basic facts about the body systems and subsystems, including rows of cells. So that would be recall and understanding. And then their DOK2 would be application of concepts. Here, students may need to apply their understanding of how the body's subsystems function together. So they will have to be integrating their knowledge of cells, tissues, organs, and systems. And then for sure, we could go to DOK3, which is strategic thinking, right? Where students now have to construct their argument supported by evidence, which would involve analyzing how different subsystems interact and synthesizing information to justify their claims. Now, this is deep, right? So we see the higher level thinking popping out here. And then could this be stretched to DOK4, which is extended thinking? Yes, I think it could, if we're asking students maybe to design or develop a model showing interactions, or showing interactions over time, of a system. So it may be a little interesting to take it to DOK4, but I think if we think on it, I know I had the students designing a model of a system and then analyzing how the impact of different scenarios on the system. And yeah, I think that would be a DOK4 for sure. All right. Then after that, step 4 here, these are what my EUs and EQs would look like. So, and the thing with EUs and EQs, I think we can play around with them. Sometimes you write one down and you're like, it sounds good. How could I elevate it? So again, that constant thinking it through and discussing it to elevate your EUs and EQs. So this is what mine looks like. And then the last step now is taking all those pieces now and writing my learning targets. So here, and I separate my learning targets into knowledge, what students should know. For example, they should be able to identify the major subsystems of the human body. What students should understand, I need them to understand how different subsystems interact with each other to maintain overall health and function. And then I have the skills. They must be able to use evidence to construct a well-supported argument, explaining how subsystems in the body interact. So I separate them now into the learning targets. All right, so I know this was a long one. As I said, pick out the parts that you want and keep it moving. So these are my reflective questions on each stage. So grab out your reflection notebook, your reflection journal, grab a couple of the reflection questions, and for sure play around with your standard and yeah, take some time to think about some of these questions. Here are some others for stage 3 where we're determining the depth of knowledge. Have I correctly identified the OK level, right? What instructional strategies will best support students in reaching the cognitive demands of that level? Some stage 4 reflection question. Do the learning objectives clearly reflect the key concept? This will be stage 5. Yeah, because I put in the EU in stage 5. Oh, I switch it around. Okay. And here are some for EUs and EQs. Do the enduring understand truly capture the big ideas that students should retain long term, right? Are your essential questions driving inquiry and encourage students to think critically? All right. Woo! We're at the end of episode 2. Where did the time go? All right. Remember, we continue to explore, to create, to learn, and to grow. All right. So we keep going. Any related resources will be linked down below when they are available. All right. And remember, do subscribe. Let's grow this channel. All right. Thank you for your time. You could have been doing anything else, but you took the time to watch this video, and I'm grateful. I hope it was useful. All right. Until next time, take care.